Hello, class. I wanted to send a video lecture about operant conditioning, which is the behavioral theory brought to us by B.F. Skinner, Burrus Frederick Skinner. Many of you are familiar with operant conditioning, but I wanted to take this opportunity to review it. And then I want to do an application that we may see clinically, actually maybe two applications that we may see clinically. So let me first start by reviewing operant conditioning. And if you have had operant conditioning relatively recently, and if you feel quite solid on this, then this review may need to be fast forwarded. But the bottom line in operant conditioning, brought to us by B.F. Skinner, building on the work of Thorndike's law of effect and Pavlov's classical conditioning and John B. Watson's lecturing psychology as a behaviorist views it, B.F. Skinner comes into the picture, and he was such a creative mind, and B.F. Skinner wanted to teach animals to do things that they ordinarily would not do, like pigeons how to bowl, using themselves as the bowling ball, or how to play ping pong even. And he was able to teach pigeons how to play ping pong. He was able to teach pigeons how to bowl using themselves as the bowling ball by applying the technique of shaping, the same technique that we as humans apply to each other all the time, but we certainly do during the potty training process. So shaping is a process of reinforcing in gradual successive steps until the entire target behavior, which in this case is the operant, occurs. And let me give an example of this. So if you want a specific behavior to occur, but it doesn't occur on its own, you have to take some steps. One step is to break down the behavior into smaller parts. So for instance, with potty training, you don't say, hello, young child, zip off and use the bathroom. You break it down into these smaller parts. You give them, cues to have them think about it. You walk them through it in gradual parts before you expect the entire target behavior, the operant, for them to use the potty on their own to occur, right? Then the next thing you do is you have to identify reinforcers that are important to the subject. So if you're reinforcing with food and the subject's not hungry, it's not going to be helpful. Or if you're reinforcing with a toy they don't like, it's not going to be helpful. So you have to identify what types of rewards, what types of reinforcers are important to the subject, and then you implement shaping, which means you start with the most achievable behavior and reinforce it, and then you expect more of the behavior to be presented on its own before it's reinforced. In other words, you reinforce in gradual successive steps. And we certainly use shaping in multiple ways with each other. I mean, look at what I'm doing now. So, I mean, I don't, hang out and talk to my computer a lot. So certainly I've been shaped. Certainly you have. We all have. It's just part of the process. So that's one very important term that I wanted to call to your attention. The next thing I want to do is establish a glossary for operant conditioning, because there's a lot of areas in operant conditioning where we go awry. And if we operationalize it, if we start from the same definition of the same terms, it really helps us. So if something so let's start with an operant. An operant is the initiating behavior. And it's not typically a noun, it's a behavior. This is behavior tracking in essence. So an operant is an initiating behavior. Common example, Mom, can I have a cookie? Sure, here's the cookie. So what was the initiating behavior? The initiating behavior was not the child, was not Mom, was not the cookie. It was, hey, Mom, can I have a cookie? So you identify the initiating behavior in that behavioral sequence, and it's operant and consequence. And so consequence is whatever follows the operant. So the behavior that follows the operant. And what we do in operant conditioning is we code the consequence and we identify its type. We haven't gotten there yet, but we will. So the bottom line is the first thing you have to do is identify the operand, and then you have to identify the consequence, right? The consequence can be good, the consequence can be reinforcing, or the consequence can be punishing. So if someone is walking down the hallway and slips and falls, then walking down the hallway is the operant, slipping and falling is the consequence. If you study really hard and you get an A on a paper, studying really hard is the operant, getting the A on the paper, in essence, would be the consequence. Okay, reinforcement is a type of consequence that increases the chance the operant will occur again. Reinforcement is a type of consequence that increases the chance the operant will occur again. In other words, it's something that strengthens the chance that the operant will occur again. So every action has a reaction. The initiating action is the operant. The reaction is the consequence, and then we code the consequence. And one term that we've addressed so far is reinforcement. It's a type of consequence that increases the chance that the behavior that preceded it will again occur. And the other term here is punishment. Punishment is a type of consequence that decreases the chance the operant will occur again. So, for instance, punishment is the only type of consequence that decreases the operant. Positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement both increase the operant. We'll go over that. But if you're walking down the hall and falling is a punishing consequence. And so chances are you're not going to walk down the hall in that particular spot. Okay? So punishment decreases the chance that the behavior that preceded it, the operant, will again occur. This is really important. This is where we really go awry here on these next two words. Positive means applying or giving. It does not mean good. I want you to think of it like addition, like an addition math problem. You don't think of it in terms of that's a good problem. Those subtraction problems are negative. You got to stay away. It's not like that. Positive just means applying. That's all. It means applying or giving. And negative doesn't mean bad. It means removal of or taking away. So think of subtraction problems. We don't, worry that the subtraction problems are bad problems. We just know that it means that you're going to take something away from something else. Okay. So now what we're going to do is kind of put all of this together, and I'm going to kind of identify the end game. In other words, this is where we're headed, and then I'm going to drill into the sum of the parts. Okay, so here's your glossary. Let's get rid of this. And this is where we're headed. Okay, so this, I don't know, this is our at the end of this discussion, let's do it that way. At the end of this discussion, the following will be understood. Let's hope. That's what we're going for here. So at the end of this discussion, we're going to know that we have an operant, and then we identify the consequence, right? So let me do that differently. So the first thing you do is identify the operant, which is the starting behavior. The second is identify the consequence. In other words, Mom, can I have a cookie? Operant. Sure, here's a cookie. Consequence. Okay. Then the third thing is that you code the consequence. And what this means is you identify, is it positive reinforcement? And we're going to define that and go over it. Is it what? Negative reinforcement? We will define this too. Or is it punishment? Okay. So when we code the consequences, we identify, is it positive reinforcement? Is it negative reinforcement? Or is it punishment? Then the fourth thing we do when we're communication tracking with operant conditioning is we identify the subtype. Each consequence has a subtype. So I'm just going to take a little shortcut and copy and paste that. And positive reinforcement has two subtypes, primary reinforcer and secondary. Or it's also called conditioned, secondary conditioned reinforcer, okay? So primary reinforcer and secondary reinforcer go with positive reinforcement. They can't go with anything else. They only go with positive reinforcement. Negative reinforcement has two subtypes, escape conditioning, woo, there we go, and avoidance conditioning. And escape conditioning and avoidance conditioning can only go with negative reinforcement. Punishment has two types, positive punishment and negative punishment. Positive punishment is also called punishment by application. Negative punishment is also called punishment by removal. Okay. So at the end of our discussion today, you'll be able to identify the operant. Mom, can I have a cookie? You'll be able to identify the consequence. Sure, honey, here's the cookie. You'll be able to code the consequence, whether it's positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, or punishment, and you will be able to identify the subtype. Positive reinforcement has two subtypes, primary, secondary condition, and negative reinforcement has two, escape or avoidance conditioning, and punishment has positive and negative punishment. So this is what you're going to be able to do at the end of our discussion. Fingers crossed, that's what we're going for. Now what we're going to do though is define all of this, and then we'll work through applications. Okay? So in response to an operant, if positive reinforcement follows it, positive reinforcement is defined as, because it's positive, it's giving or applying, because of the word positive, something to increase the chance the operant will occur again. So positive reinforcement gives or applies, and if you think about it, the desired. What is desired? What is wanted? So that the operant will occur again. So let's take a look at our example. Our example was, Mom, can I have a cookie? Sure, I'm going to give you the cookie. So giving the desired cookie increases the chance that when the child wants a cookie again, they're going to go to mom and ask, right? Positive reinforcement is giving or applying, so giving what is desired, and it strengthens the operant. And we identified already that there's two types. Primary reinforcer. Primary reinforcers are food and drink. They were coded initially as being a primary reinforcer because there was something necessary for survival, but anything food or drink is coded as a primary reinforcer. And secondly, secondary conditioned reinforcers are culturally specific things we learn to like, such as in this culture, money is a big one. Compliments, getting an A, all of those are secondary conditioned. Conditioned means learned. Reinforcers. So for instance, Mom, can I have a cookie? Operant. Sure, I'm going to give you the cookie. Positive reinforcement. Then we have to identify, is that a primary reinforcer, a secondary or conditioned reinforcer? And because a cookie is food, it's a primary reinforcer. And it increases the likelihood the operant will again occur. So it increases the likelihood that when the child wants a cookie, they're going to go to mom and ask. If you study really hard and you get an A on a test, the operant is studying really hard, being given the A on the test that you earned is positive reinforcement. And because it's not food or drink, it's a secondary conditioned reinforcer. And it will increase the likelihood that you will study again. So that covers, positive reinforcement. I am kind of all over the place here, getting my board lined up. Okay, here we go. So I hope that is clear and I hope that is helpful, and we're going to work it a little bit more as we go. So the next type of consequence that we're going to talk about in response to an operant, we can have negative reinforcement. One of the most important things to remember is that reinforcement increases or strengthens the chance the operant will occur again. Negative reinforcement is not punishment. Negative doesn't mean bad. It's good. This is a type of reward. And it's a reward. By the term negative means taking away or removing the undesired, removing what we don't want to increase the chance the operant will occur again. So let's take a look at this. So I want you to imagine that, there we go. I want you to imagine that a child is studying really, really hard, and the parent decides to apply negative reinforcement and does so by saying, listen, you usually have to pick up your toys, but you're just trying so hard, you're working so hard on reading your book, I'll pick up the toys for you so that you don't have to do that chore. So I've taken away or removed the undesired chore to strengthen the operant that you'll continue to work hard reading your book. That's an example of negative reinforcement. Another example of negative reinforcement is why I drink water all day long. I've got a big old jug of water here and I drink water all day long because I run outside in the heat and I don't want to get dehydrated, right? So let's do a quick example here. So to the operant of drinking water, I avoid getting dehydrated. So the consequence, the operant is drinking the water. The consequence is avoiding dehydration. And taking away or removing the undesired dehydration is coded as negative reinforcement. Now there's two types of negative reinforcement, and often when we go over these two types, it makes more sense. So one is escape conditioning, and it's when you do something to make something that is undesired stop that has already started. Now that's really weird to word it that way, but it will get us there the quickest. So let's look at this in terms of dehydration. So I want you to imagine that dehydration has started, okay? So we're gonna do another example. Dehydration has started, so I do something like drink a bunch to make it stop. In other words, to escape it. That is negative reinforcement, escape conditioning. Because the dehydration started and I did something to make it stop, maybe I drank electrolytes or something like that to make it stop, the undesired started, and then I did something. When you do something to make the undesired stop, it's negative reinforcement, escape conditioning. When I drink a lot to avoid dehydration starting, I am reinforced by the second type of negative reinforcement, and it's called avoidance conditioning. Avoidance conditioning is when you do something so the undesired does not start. So you're not stopping it once it started. You do something to avoid it from starting or starting again, if you've experienced that in your past. So when I drink lots and lots and lots and lots so that I don't get dehydrated, I'm reinforced to continue to do it, drinking lots and lots and lots, by negative reinforcement avoidance conditioning. All right, let's do one more example. Whoop. Okay, if someone takes a pain reliever to make a headache, so if someone takes a pain reliever because they have a headache, and the headache goes away, they are reinforced by, I want you to think what the answer is for a second. So someone takes a pain reliever because they have a headache. That's the operant. The consequence is the headache goes away. Then we're going to code the consequence, the headache going away. And when the headache goes away, they're reinforced by negative reinforcement, removal of the undesired headache, but it had started, right? And then they took it to make it go away. Therefore, it is escape conditioning. If they know that, if they know that they typically do something that makes them have a headache, and so they take a pain reliever before the headache ever starts, then not having the headache would be avoidance conditioning, negative reinforcement. Okay, so far, let's recap. In response to an operant, if you're given the desired, it's positive reinforcement. If it's food or drink, it's primary. If it's learned, it's secondary conditioned reinforcer. Negative reinforcement is often confused. It's not punishment. Even the news often will present it as, you've got to negatively reinforce your children. Yeah, you do, but you're not punished. That's not punishment. Negative reinforcement is a reward. It's awesome. It's when we take away something that's undesired to strengthen the operant. For instance, if someone is given a punishment and they correct the behavior and the punishment is removed, escape conditioning, negative reinforcement is demonstrated. And then if they correct the behavior so they don't get punished again, avoidance conditioning of negative reinforcement is demonstrated. Okay, so let's move now to our third. So in response to an operant, we have punishment. Punishment is the only type of consequence that decreases the chance the operant will occur again. Positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement both increase it. So punishment's the only one that decreases it. And there's two types of punishment. Positive punishment, or punishment by applying, by application, is applying or giving the undesired to decrease an operant, So in other words, if you give someone stop it, if you do something like that, like stop doing that, which, you know, isn't great, but let's say that's what you chose to do. Stop doing that. You're applying the undesired, right? You're correcting them. You're kind of yelling at them. That's positive punishment because it's applying the undesired. It doesn't mean it's a good punishment. It doesn't mean it's effective, but we don't code things like that. We code it as positive punishment because it's applying or giving the undesired to decrease the operant. Negative punishment is taking away or removing the desired to decrease an operant. So when you take away a child's favorite toy because they did something unacceptable, you're applying negative punishment. Punishment by removal doesn't mean it's bad. It just means that it's removing the desired to decrease the operant. So I hope that this discussion has been helpful. With your notes in place, let's go over an application with operant conditioning that you might see clinically. I'll start it. Let me clear this. Okay, so I want to start it kind of basic. So kind of a simplistic idea, but an important one. So we're going to do some clinical applications with operant conditioning. Okay, So one clinical application of operant conditioning is when you're working with a client, you do not want to reinforce something like, you don't want to reinforce anxious behavior, or you don't want to reinforce depressive behavior. You want to reinforce healthy behavior. So oftentimes clinicians handle this way, where family members might have a tendency to reinforce unhealthy behavior. So if someone is showing anxiety, they pull off responsibilities and that's what loved ones can do, because they're so stressed, they don't want to stress them out more. And by taking away those undesired extra responsibilities, you can actually strengthen the anxious behavior. So clinically, we try to work with that so that we reinforce healthy behaviors instead of reinforcing the behaviors that we're trying to work on. So, I mean, that's one kind of straightforward clinical example. We have a tendency to reinforce non-depressive behavior or non-anxious behavior, and really try to build those reinforcements as connected to positive behaviors that we want to increase, or healthy behaviors we want to increase. Another way that operant conditioning is applied is through communication tracking. And we can do communication tracking in couples or in family work, where we try to look at the different dynamics between the family members and make sure that we're reinforcing behavior we want to increase, and that we're not reinforcing behaviors that we want to decrease. And I thought perhaps we could do an example where there's some very anger reactive dynamics in a relationship. And if this example makes you uncomfortable, you can fast forward through it. Okay, so I'm just going to do an example of maybe somewhat of a controlling relationship. You see this sometimes when you do couples counseling, and you identify in some ways where behaviors are getting reinforced and how that's working. There's complicated treatments that we do. This is just an operant conditioning application. So let's, on this side, put operants, and let's on this side put the consequences. And remember, what we code and type is the consequences. So let's say that we have a partnership. Okay, we have a couple that's in a committed relationship. One of them tends to be kind of domineering and a little bit more controlling, and the other one has a tendency to be apologetic and a little bit passive. Those dynamics are not uncommon. And let's say that the one that has a tendency to be more pleasing in the behavior has been out running errands, and they come home. And when they return home, they're returned with, "Where have you been?" Okay, again, "Where have you been?" is definitely not how we would want to be greeted. You know, that's not what I would want for us. But when we look at the consequence of "where have you been," that is, whoa, that is coded as positive punishment. Okay, when we yell or we're really stern with someone, we're applying positive punishment by applying what is undesired. Okay, and then let's say in response to every action has a reaction, and then that action brings new reactions. So in response to that "where have you been," that real strong "where have you been," let's say that the person responds with an apology. This can happen. So, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I should have told you. I was running errands to, you know, whatever it is." So the person kind of apologetically explains what's going on. So now when we look at that consequence, remember, these are our clients. They're, you know, our client is coming because they're struggling a little bit. Let's say that the client that is coming is the one that's more passive and more pleasing. Let's say that the one that's a little bit more domineering didn't want to come. So we're working with the client that comes, and in response to "where have you been," we ask, you know, "Well, how do you respond?" Apologizing. I should have called. I make excuses, and I tell them what I've been doing and stuff like that. And so we explain that that is a positive reinforcement because it's giving the desired apology with a secondary conditioned reinforcer, and that kind of reaction will increase the chance the behavior will occur again. The operant of where have you been will occur again. So there's no judgment here. By the way, there could be a lot to this. Oftentimes with situations, we try to do screenings for any abusive behaviors. And let's say that there's no abusive behaviors in this person that's come to us for counseling. We've already screened by that. They're just kind of wondering why their partner, I don't know, why they apologize so much or where their partner is becoming more controlling. There's probably a lot more to this, but again, it is just an operant conditioning application. So this is a simplistic application, okay? We would do a lot more clinically perhaps. And then let's say in response to the apology, the should haves and the excuses, let's say that the individual says something like, you know, sometimes they can amp it up a little bit and they can get more angry. They can get more assertive. They can even assert, I don't believe you, something like that. But let's say in this case, the person responds with, you know, something like, you know how much I love you. I just don't trust people, something like that. I just don't trust others. I need to know where you are, something like that. And again, our client feels controlled by this. And these would be somewhat of controlling behaviors for sure. And we would take a really detailed approach. But when the client responds that way, you know how much I love you. I just don't trust others. I need to know where you are. You know how much you mean to me. All of that stuff, oftentimes that also serves as positive reinforcement because they're giving the client those affirmations. And if our client is very pleasing, those affirmations mean something with a secondary conditioned reinforcer. So again, that is reinforcing the chance that our client will apologize again instead of challenging that controlling behavior. Again, very simplistic response. Very simplistic, not a simplistic scenario, but a simplistic application that we're just doing with operant conditioning. And we do see these things clinically. We use many other tools, very comprehensive tools, but I wanted to highlight that. Let's do another quick application before we put operant conditioning to rest. And let's imagine that we have a mother who is kind of stressed out because every time she says no, her young child screams and screams and screams, and she's feeling exasperated and she's feeling stressed out. And she's just like, oh my gosh, they have so many temper tantrums. So we go, okay, tell us a recent example. When we went into the toy store, I told the child they can't have a toy. I can't buy you a toy. We're here to buy gifts for others. I don't know, can't buy you a toy, whatever that is. And the child responded with a temper tantrum. Okay, so we've got to code this temper tantrum. A child screaming at the parent and yelling is coded as positive punishment, giving the undesired temper tantrum. And so we asked mom, well, what did you do? And mom explains, well, I went around the store, I saw people staring at me, I started getting upset and they just yell and they just yell and the child just yells and yells and yells. And so in response to their temper tantrum, I just got so tired, I got so worn out, and we go, listen, that's okay, you know, tell us what you did. And they go, I gave the child the toy. Ah, mistake. But they did. They gave the child a toy, and this happens a lot. And that means giving the toy, giving the desired is positive reinforcement with a secondary conditioned reinforcer. That is where the mistake certainly is coming in. And this is where we would equip mom with parenting skills and punishment skills, because mom needs some help to use an appropriate and fair punishment instead of reinforcement, right? Because it increases the likelihood the tantrum will occur again. And then we ask mom in response to giving the toy what happened, and mom goes, oh, the temper tantrum stopped. And so we code that as the negative reinforcement, right? The undesired temper tantrum was taken away, it stopped. but it started and then it was stopped, so it's escape conditioning. So it increases the likelihood the behavior that precedes it will happen again. So what's happened here is the child really has figured out to get mom to figure out how to have mom give the child whatever the child wants. And so what we would do is equip skills here. And we would work here to help mom have appropriate alternatives and appropriate ways to handle a temper tantrum, because initially when you're modifying those behaviors, the temper tantrums will be quite persistent. So again, that's just a simplistic application of operant conditioning, but my sincerest hope is that it helps clarify how we use operant conditioning in communication tracking. So I hope this has been helpful, and I hope the rest of your day is a good one.